Quotas. All right, so I've clicked start here on the webinar. We're going to hang tight for a moment until we see people starting to come into the waiting room. Excited to be here with you guys today to talk about capacity planning, even though it's just May, something that's starting to come up in people's workflows and starting to think about that.
I mean, I think the timing's great for it because it's May. And whether people want to acknowledge that or not, it's going to be June and then July, and then you will be capacity planning.
Yep. Once everybody's vacations are done, then it's real. Yeah, so we wanted to get started with this now. And my goal is that we do this as an introductory session to start to expose the functionality to more of our customers. And then, at the end of the session, I'm hoping to have some more ideas for what future sessions would be helpful to dive into details. So we'll get a little bit of that as well. But I see people in the meeting, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do quick introductions and housekeeping, and then I'll pass it off to our lovely team here to get into the details with us. So welcome to our webinar. I'm Ashley Kim. I do customer education. I'm joined by Marisa Reed, who leads our implementation team, Tyler Simons, who's our director of product, and Brian Goodson, who is our sales engineer. So like the slide says, we're getting started with capacity planning. For our session today, we're going to start with a demo, which is going to be an overview of the primary models that we have for capacity planning and the inputs and outputs of those models. We'll look a little bit more at configuration and the capabilities. I want to make sure that our customers are aware of what levers there are for you to tweak in terms of that actual process of dialing in your capacity plan, and also understand the capabilities that Fullcast has around capacity planning, what we can do and also what we can't do, and hopefully open it up for you all to tell us what's most important to you. And then we will also have Q&A at the end. Feel free, though, to put your questions in the Q&A box at any time. I will have that open. And as questions come in, we will make sure we get to those. And if there's not space during the active parts of the demo, then we'll make sure we have those answered at the end as well. I will get the recording emailed out to everybody who registered tomorrow. So before I hand it over to the team, I thought I would kind of set the stage for us regarding what to expect from our capacity planning. So the overarching question, and Tyler, Marisa, Brian, feel free to jump in at any time. The overarching question and the way we're framing this is, how many reps do you need and how much quota should you assign them to get to your revenue goals? And this takes the form of, you'll see when Brian gives the demo, but you're going to be able to see what your revenue is going to look like over the year when it comes to answering those questions. So for the inputs, you're going to have the ability to put in your current head count, the seasonality of your reps productivity over the year, your anticipated attrition, plus the time that you typically take to backfill those attritions, the average quota and attainment rate of your reps in the role that you're planning for, and then the ramp profiles that you see for new hires to your organization. So once you put those into your models, you're going to get an initial kind of a capacity plan that you can then go and tweak those inputs. You can look at things like, what happens if my ramp is 1 month faster? You've got an enablement program, for example. You can adjust things on that front. What happens if my attainment gets better? What happens if I adjust or increase my quota by a certain percent? What happens if I change my hiring plans such that I hire a month earlier to hire 2 months later, and so forth? So that's just a quick overview of the way that we're approaching this. And as Brian gives his demo and talks through things, you'll start to see what these look like in Fullcast. I'm going to pause. Is there anything I've left out before we hand it over to Brian to do his demo? All righty.
You're good. I mean, that was a great summary. So you're spot on.
Doing my job. All right, I'll pass it over to Brian.
All right. Let's get the platform up here.
Oh my gosh. Can I pause you, Brian? I did miss one thing in my spiel. I have a quick poll here that I'll leave open for the duration of the webinar, it's really helpful for us to know, like right now, when you guys are looking at capacity planning, both in light of the way that I kind of highlighted the way that we're approaching capacity planning, as well as your current challenges. I think I just launched a poll. I hope everybody can see it here that says, what's your biggest challenge with capacity planning? And feel free to type in, you know, if there's things specific to the content I had on the slide, or just in general, what your challenges are. And we can use that to hopefully incorporate into some of the content today as well. So that'll be kind of there. Feel free to answer that and I'll keep an eye on it. That's all. Thank you.
All right, awesome. So let's jump right into this. And we all can see my screen here, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so before we jump into the headcount plan, I just want to sort of orient everybody. The Fullcast platform, it's fully interconnected. So, you know, regardless if we're in our plans side of the platform or we're looking at our capacity models or our teams, everything that we do in any aspect of the platform, we could reference that data. So as we build out our teams, we could see our teams as we're looking at our capacity, similar to the roles that we've set up in the different ramp profiles and productivity profiles that we set up for those roles. So right now we're on our plans tab. You know, as you know, this is kind of where we would spend our time carving territories, managing coverage, tracking performance. I'm going to go ahead and jump up to our scenarios tab. And the scenarios tab is where we would really focus on that headcount planning and our capacity modeling. So right away, as I jump in here, you'll see that we have different folders. The idea here is that as you're building out your different scenarios and capacity models, you could look at this from a number of different perspectives, where you could have multiple fiscal years, plan for multiple fiscal years, as well as within a single fiscal year, have multiple what-if scenarios. So I just wanted to show you that there. I'll go ahead and jump into one of our plans that we've set up called the GTM in 30. So each of our capacity models have sort of two views that you'll see here. There's the scenarios tab as well as the models tab. You'll be spending most of your time building out your models on the model side here. What we look at this scenarios tab as a way to sort of take the output from your model work that you've done from a capacity modeling standpoint to understand how the costs that are associated with those different headcount models play with existing revenues and expenses. So you could bring those in and kind of have a holistic view here. But jumping over here to our models view. So the way that we think about capacity models is actually building up your model with a series of smaller models here. We have a number of different options where you can build out pipeline, waterfall, you know, GRR, carried quota. But primarily when we're thinking about building out our capacity plans, we're looking at really two models here, which are our carried quota as well as our effective headcount. So I'll go ahead and jump into each of these and give you a rundown of how it is that we think about it. So each of the models have a series of inputs and outputs. The way that it would work is you would come in and enter your inputs based on how it is that you think about and view your business, and the outputs are automatically generated for you. So the carried quota, typically this is where people would start in this process. And when we think about what it is that this carried quota model tells you, it's two things. One, what is it that we should be assigning out to our reps from a quota perspective on a month-by-month basis? And the second one is, how many reps do we need to hit our revenue goal? And we also break that out as a month-by-month basis, and we measure this in person months is kind of the unit that we use to calculate this. So if we look at our inputs, there's three things that we'll look for your carried quota. The first is your attainment factor. You know, what percentage is your team attaining their quota today? The second one is going to be your average monthly quota for a fully ramped rep. We would come in here and enter that number. If you know what that number is, you can come in here and manually enter the number. But what we've actually done here is we've derived this number based on other existing data that we've put into Fullcast. So we're able to look at what the quota is. So our targets that we've assigned to all AEs for the all company, you know, for the whole company, we're dividing that by the number of actual heads that we have. And this is something that we're pulling from your teams module. And then we're dividing it again by 12 to get your average monthly quota. Third, the last data point that we're pulling in here is your new revenue required. So this is how much revenue do I want to close this new business with these reps that I'm setting setting a capacity model for. In this case, similarly, we could take that number, we could bring it in. If this is a number from finance, we could put this number in here manually, but we have the ability to break this out by seasonality. So if we know, for example, that our number is going to be 48 million, That's what we want to hit. We can distribute that number throughout the year based on another data point that we're looking at, like, for example, a metric or a field that we could reference that might inform how it is that we would want to see that data distributed. So I'll quickly give an example to kind of show you what I mean here. So if we, for example, had a metric, and that metric was, let's say, we have our revenue numbers for FY 25 or FY 24. What we do is when we pull in this metric, we can see how it is that that specific value is distributed on a percentage basis for how that revenue came in FY 24. And then we overlay that percentage and we look at it based on our new number, in this case, the 48 million. So the distribution of this new revenue is now relevant and is more aligned with how it is that we would actually expect that revenue to come into your business. So this is the first model. This is the carried quota. Once we enter in all three of these data points, the output is what we call your carried quota, which is actually what we should be assigning out, which takes into account your average quota for your reps and attainment factor. And then how many reps do we actually need based on this data that we've provided to hit that number? So after we've gone through and we've developed your carried quota, typically what people do is they move over to your next model, which is your effective headcount. So I'll go ahead and open this up as well. So effective headcount, this model works similarly to the other in the sense that there's a series of inputs and outputs. The inputs for the effective headcount are a little different though. So for inputs, what we're going to look at are your current headcount. So in this case, what we've done is we've pulled in our account executives from our teams module, and we've got a count of exactly what our headcount is for the year based on the actual amount of people that we have on these teams. Second, we're going to look at your attrition projection. So throughout the year, there's always going to be moves, adds, and changes with your reps. What you can do here is project how many people you anticipate leaving the organization. If you have an HRIS system that you've have integrated with Fullcast, we could actually pull data from that system to help predict where you would see attrition based on historical attrition numbers. Next, what we're looking at is your hire lead time. So when people do leave the organization, around how long does it take to hire someone else to replace that seat? And then lastly, what we're looking at for your effective headcount is your required effective headcount. So the interesting thing is that this input that we're looking at is actually an output from one of the prior models that we had just looked at for your carried quota. So here, what you see is we're actually referencing that model, that carried quota model input, and we're pulling this number in here to tell you exactly how many reps you need to hit the revenue goal that you outputted before. So once we enter all this information, we'll give you outputs around your to be hireds and your to be replaced. But where you'll really get into the data is over here on your details page. This is where we sort of bring it all together. So what we're looking at here are your current heads. So we give you a full breakdown of all of the reps that are on all of your teams. The structure that you see here, this is pulled directly from your teams module. So as you have reps in Salesforce, what we'll do is pull those into your teams module, organize them into teams, into the actual org structure. So you'll have managers with reps that are rolling up to them. You'll see this structure here. This represents your current heads. We'll bring in your attrition as well as the replacement reps. What you're seeing here is that these are offset based on the time it takes to replace each of those heads. So that offset is represented here. And then we're also bringing in new hires. So the number of new hires that you see in this view is directly related to the gap in between what's currently there and what's needed based on the modeling that we did earlier. So we'll make suggestions around how many reps that you would expect to need in this place. And then we total it up. And then underneath this view, and this total, by the way, this is a total based on what's currently there minus the attrition, and it takes into account the new hires that you're bringing in. And this gives you a total. This is a total of how many heads you would have based on the modeling with these new hires. We take this total and then we compare it to your required headcount. So if you remember, we did a prior step where we did a breakdown of what it is that we want to target from a new revenues perspective and how many reps that it would take to hit that number. We're comparing what you currently have in seat and you currently plan to hire to what it would require to actually hit your goal. And the difference between those two numbers is your gap. So the idea when we're coming into this model and sort of actively building it and managing it is that we're trying to make it so that there's no gap in between what's needed and where you have requirements for a head there. And in order to make this model work, we have these to be hired records that we will create here. These are all modular in the sense that you could move where it is that you would have a new hire. And how you would practically look at this is by moving the gap or by updating numbers so that these gaps in here are reduced. So ideally, what we would want to see is a positive number. The positive number would suggest that we're at or above the number of reps that we would need, whereas a negative number would suggest that we are behind, or we may need to hire people earlier on in the year. So the kind of exercises that you would do is you would see, for example, that in November, later in the year, we're going to be behind in the number of heads that we need to hit our stated financial goals. So if we have hires that we had planned for November or October, let's go ahead and bring those up earlier in the year so that we have time to have those reps ramp and have better contribution towards productivity with these gaps that we would see. And with these new hires being listed here under our dropdown, this allows you to come in here and make those moves. So, if someone was slated for September, we could come in here and bring them forward into the beginning of the year. And we would see numbers on the right side update in real time. So the idea is that you would set up this model so that you have your new hires set up in such a way that your gaps are reduced or eliminated, and you use that positive negative figure to identify where there are gaps in your model and where you might need to potentially move people ahead or later on in the hiring process. Also, I'll state that the ramp profiles that we had talked about a little bit earlier when I mentioned that everything was interconnected. Each of these individuals are set up with a role and a specific ramp profile. And you'll see here on the right side on this blue part of the panel that the number that this individual is contributing for January, February, March, and so on doesn't start at 1. A 1 would represent one person contributing for 1 month and being counted as a single person month. But because these people are still ramping, you'll see that they are slowly coming up to what we would consider a fully ramped rep, and in our case, a person fully contributing to their headcount. So the ramp, this is also something that's modifiable, as well as their productivity profiles and the role that they're in. So it really allows you to get in there and massage the numbers, move hires forward and back, and ultimately see how that impacts your gap when you're comparing it to what your financial goals are for your new revenue. So I will go ahead and pause there for questions or thoughts.
Just going to jump in as well, Brian, really quick, just to, reiterate that, you can do this at a high level, which is sort of what we're seeing here for the whole organization, but then you can make models for, just your AMER region or just your EMEA region as well, and get a bit more granular if you want to model out specific scenarios and specific types of headcount and things like that for those regions, or for an enterprise team versus a commercial team, things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you have different revenue goals for your different regions and you want to specifically hit those numbers relevant to how many heads you have in those segments, then you could break this out. We don't necessarily have to roll this up. You could have different models for AMER, APAC, and EMEA that are specific to those regions, and you'll be able to have gaps that are specific to those as well.
Is there a limit to how many models somebody can create? So say you wish to try out a bunch of different things and you want to build a bunch of various models. Are there limits to that?
Nope, there's no limit to any model. So, if we look at our scenarios tab again, for example, you'll remember that we had our different folders. These outline different fiscal years. Within even a single fiscal, we could have multiple models, and there's really no limit to how many that we could build out in this way.
And just to also reiterate, because I know you showed us pulling in things like the targets from within Fullcast that had already been built out. So if you are using Fullcast and you have already populated ramp profiles and you've already built targets and you're using all of that, you've already got part of that work done to leverage your capacity planning. So at that point, it's really refining the inputs But if you've been using things like targets over a period of time, you're able to leverage those from prior years, add in like a growth percent, things like that, to kind of play with these numbers even more as you're building that out and putting in your inputs.
Yeah, and a good example of that, I'll jump back to it, is how we've defined the average monthly quota for a fully ramped rep. You know, if you know the number, it's easy to come in here and type it. But what we've done here is we've actually leveraged what we've assigned as quota previously. We were dividing this by the number of reps that we have, and we're deriving this number. We've only done this in the average monthly quota, but we can do this in any of these inputs that we're looking at in our capacity model.
Does anyone have any questions as we're kind of going through some of this?
If no one has questions, I'll start talking, but
go for it. We all love to hear your voice.
I want to see some questions around here. I want to take a moment and really almost take a step back from all this, the tactical stuff that we're kind of looked at here. And Brian, if you can go back one into the models there. The real lens that we have around the scenario planner and the different models that exist is we really want this to kind of be building the Lego blocks, right? So it's just like stacking blocks and models on top of each other to really build what you would consider your scenario plan. So one of those ways that we can like highlight that is through this assumptions thing that we have at the top. So if Brian, you go into the assumptions, you can add assumptions that can then be referenced throughout all your different models. So it's not just a matter of like, I want to put my attainment in one place, which is 70%, but you could put an attainment or a seasonality here within the formula builder, reference that throughout several different models that you build out, and you can make tweaks in one place. So maybe your attainment assumption was 70%. Now you want to change the attainment assumption to, let's say, 80%. You can go into your assumptions, which would be like this style screen, change it to 80. And if you have 4 or 5 different capacity models because you're thinking about breaking financial services out into a separate sector or segment, or you're thinking about changing the lines between mid-market and enterprise, you can kind of like play with these different model assumptions here and have it propagate through the different other models that you might have. So this is super powerful for a lot of the custom assumptions that you might have. In some of the other models that we've built out, we've got things like, what's the cost per MQL for us? Yeah. And you can take that and start to stack the cost per MQL, the marketing spend that's going to happen, and then figure out, well, approximately how many MQLs might I get. From that, if you know your conversion rates from MQL to SQL, SQL to SQO, SQO to closed won, you can then start to figure out, well, how much revenue will I generate from that? And then feed that in as a revenue projection into the carried quota model. And so where I'm like kind of starting to stack all these different things on top of each other to get to a point where we've got a carried quota number, which tells us how many reps we're going to need, which then tells us, okay, well, how do we start to move these pieces to make it all balance out and reduce that gap that Brian was talking about?
Right. And when you did this in the past, you would be doing this in a spreadsheet and be tinkering with, you know, like you mentioned, like the, you know, one number to try to see what that did further downstream. So now you're tinkering with it in one assumption and you're able to kind of propagate it through.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about all your formulas breaking.
I had
my formula never broke.
Marissa's like, you didn't see my spreadsheet. Marissa, not the time for that one. Not the time for that one. So that was super helpful, I think, for the big picture. And we got a couple of questions during that. So the first one I did answer, but I'll voice for the group as well in case there's some additional information. then what's the first step to start running in the scenario planner? I'd assume setting up teams and ramp is the biggest basic need to even start doing effective headcount planning. And that's correct from a Fullcast perspective as well, in order to give you that structure that you saw in that details page where you have like the team and the different people allocated to the team and your TBH placeholders and so forth. You need a structure set up there. And really as granular as you want to see. If you want to see it broken down by regions or to very small individual teams, you can build out that hierarchical structure in the teams module. And then you need the roles and ramp profiles associated with them that you want to be able to model out within your to be hired and your to be replaced scenarios. Anything you all would add to that one, like the basics that you need to have in place to get started?
One thing would be productivity.
Productivity profiles too.
Yeah, we should probably disambiguate that because our terminology, I think, might not be completely consistent with what everybody else is saying. So for us, your productivity is like, how is the seasonality of your business across the year? When do you typically see your revenue coming in across the months? And then your ramp is associated with the role. Like you might have different ramps for different segments. How quickly essentially does a new hire get up to speed?
Can I tweak your
And
definition?
yes,
So you
and
can
then
have productivity by you can have that productivity by specific roles as well. Like your enterprise may not have the same productivity schedule in seasonality as your SMB.
It's very close to quota.
Yeah.
And in some regards, you could say that that's quota.
Yeah.
The reason why it doesn't say quota is because people don't typically hit their quota. And so there's this notion of productivity and what we can actually expect from a rep in a given role. That is the productivity or the revenue that really somebody would generate. And that might be 70, 80, 90%, whatever your attainment is of what might be the end quota that you deliver, right? So I think that's an important distinction, but that is really what that productivity is there for. And that feeds into this annual number. And then as Ashley was saying, with like the seasonality of the business at that given role. So if you've got, an enterprise rep might have different seasonality than your government rep, and you'll want to reflect that within the productivity that exists within the roles module that we have. Those can be all dragged into here, and then you can kind of see that propagate down into the different numbers. I think it's kind of on the far right there past the net ramped resources into your actual numbers that we add up.
And within the model, as you're looking at this view as well, I think Brian showed it, but again, just to stress, you can change those on the fly to kind of see how that will impact impact what you've built here.
Absolutely. And I think one other important thing to note here, sort of as we're looking at each of these individual reps, they all have ramp profiles that are associated with them. So as we're looking at, how does this productivity actually translate to dollars? And, again, the assumption here is that we have a rep that's hitting 100% of their quota. But if they're ramping, then, part of the assumptions that we make with Fullcast is that a rep is as productive as their ramping status. So what that means is that if somebody is 50% ramped, then we would expect them to hit around 50% of their quota. So with these numbers, we talked about sort of how these build up from 0 all the way up to 1 to kind of represent a fully ramped rep. As we scroll over to the right side, you'll see that these numbers are going to be different depending on how far they are in their ramp. As they become fully ramped, you'll see that these numbers are slowly starting close to small at like the 22,000 level, and then they slowly ramp up much higher as this rep becomes fully ramped in the system. So I just also wanted to make sure we talk to that piece of it.
Okay, great, thanks. I have another
question up there. Yeah. Were you going to go for it?
I'm gonna go for it. I'll say it. Okay. That's my part. So this one is, what types of input sources can Fullcast accept? For example, Workday files to get actual start and end dates of planned hires. Sounds like this person is asking, like, could we use Workday files to like input those, excuse me, that start and end date that we have in that sheet view that Brian was just showing.
So from the Workday integration front that we have in beta, I would call it that, right? We've developed a POC. So if you're wanting to pull in Workday integrate or Workday data into Fullcast, please reach out to your CSM so we can start that conversation and kind of get that going. You're going to start seeing a lot more of those style integrations from us in the future. We're just waiting for customers to say, hey, I want to get that data into Fullcast so we can start to figure out, what is my attrition assumptions? What are whatever else you might have within Workday that you want to kind of track, right? As you think about expenses, if you think about that initial scenario model, and you're wanting to pull in the expenses, that's a place that maybe, you would want that Workday information into Fullcast so you can start to calculate that stuff out.
Very good. I see the next question here, Ashley.
Yeah.
I was actually just queuing this up here. So the question is, can you use this to create manager quotas that it would include an overassigned percentage on the top for the sales rep to roll up? So the way that we think about overassign, and I've pulled up our carried quota model here, but the way that we think about our overassign is really with your attainment factor and kind of the inputs that we bring into your carried quota. So what this model is here showing is that from a goals standpoint, the number that we want to hit for January is a little over 3 million. But if you look down to your carried quota for what we're actually assigning out for January, it's up to 4.1 million. So it's far above what it is that we're actually trying to hit from a goals perspective. And the difference between these two is taking into account all of the data that we've put in here from an attainment factor perspective and what's your average monthly quota for a fully ramped rep. So to answer your question, to take that level of kind of buffer, to add that extra buffer or overassign into your model, these are the numbers that you would tweak to get that represented in what your actual carried quota would be. You would modify what your attainment number would be, or we could take a look at what your average monthly quota for a fully ramped rep is. And by changing those numbers, that in effect adds overassign or buffer to your carried quota.
So just a quick note on this as well. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at a capacity planning. So we're looking at modeling out headcount scenarios, things like that. But if you are just looking to track and manage quota and targets, you can absolutely also use the target module to craft a manager quota that are a percentage of the individual quotas within their groups. So that is absolutely a possibility as well.
I was going to ask one question as well, and this might not be directly related, but I know that in the effective details tab for the details side of the effective headcount model, there is the option to show manager. Is this involved at all with the question, or is that kind of not what we're being asked?
I think the idea is that we have quotas that are owned by the reps. A number rolls up to that manager, but sometimes there's extra buffer assigned to the manager. In the event that people don't hit 100% of their quota. That I was just explaining that concept is really covered here with this attainment factor and the monthly average quota. And as we actually build out these quotas in Fullcast, we also have the option to build additional targets specific to the managers. That's outside of what the reps are hitting. So we could look at those numbers separately as well if we needed to.
Okay. I'm not immediately. Okay, great. All right. I have another question here. How do multiple types of quotas work in Fullcast? For example, what if we have reps that have 3 or 4 items in their comp plan?
Good question. And a lot of people do have multiple things they're trying to track from an attainment perspective. So you can create, again, within the targets module, you have the ability to create targets on different metrics. So you can create multiple targets to track multiple different quotas that folks might have. And
I'm just
I
trying
mean, I don't know that there's any limits on that, Tyler, other than what you're capturing in Fullcast as far as what you can track via a metric to use in the target module. Like, I don't believe there's any limits to how many quotas somebody could enter.
No, and I think what I'm like, where I'm thinking is like, well, you know, really capacity for this, what we're looking at today is
Mhm.
very focused on people and where we're going to put them. And in a general sense, if we hire people or we put TBHs in February, March, and April, will we, based on their ramp schedule and them being enterprise versus SMB, will we hit a number? The actual quota setting piece, which is maybe I want to set an ARR goal and you have a variable component or your consumption component, whatever those things are, that typically lives in the quota setting side of Fullcast. And you can set quota either against a territory, so the quota belongs to the territory, or to a person, which would be in the team side of the house, and you set quota against that person, and you can have multiple pieces of that quota and kind of build that stuff up. So I think that that's really the distinction that we have. And this is very much what we do today here in the scenario planner is a tops down approach. And the more the bottoms up where you kind of build these multiple things together would exist in the quota setting side of the house.
That said, you could build different quota models here where you're referencing different targets. So you could kind of have a compare and contrast across different targets depending on what you're looking at from this perspective.
True, you could you could go in and build out all your different productivities for the different quotas. You could build out the like if we look at the quota here, you could add those AE quotas up. You could add up your AE quota, your variable, all of these things together in one. So it's certainly flexible enough if you wanted to do all of that.
Great questions. Do we have any other ones?
Nope.
I don't see any others at the moment. I was trying to think through if there are things that we didn't show yet.
I have some tips and tricks.
Or tips and tricks. That's what I was also
I don't know. I don't know if people care to see these things.
People love tips and tricks.
I love your tips and tricks. Everyone should get
so if you go to the effective headcount model there, Brian, and go back into the details page. So up at the top right, I want to spend a little bit of time up there. And, we had a lot of feedback on like, hey, we're seeing a lot of junk in this grid. Can we just see it quarterly or annually? You can do that by changing the time frames of things. So let's just change it to quarterly. Most people think of this as a quarterly view. I worked with many customers on this, and it's like weird in the sense that your ramp is always monthly, right? You always think about ramp on a monthly basis, but quota and those things are all on a quarterly basis for the most part. And so that's kind of what we've built here. The other thing that we noticed is that there's a ton of changes. Like you're going to start this in July. And if you're running right now a plan that you have a current go-to-market plan that you're running in production, it's pushing to Salesforce, you've got teams built out, people are changing teams, they're getting promoted, they're leaving the business, you're hiring people, but you're also at the same time in another plan that's kind of trying to set up what you're thinking about for next fiscal year. And what we didn't want to do was start just changing those people in this plan automatically because you're like moving people around in the Teams module. And so you actually now have this little yellow circle thing that kind of popped up next to the TBHs where we can then start to, and you select that, Brian, start to detect things like people got moved, or we've noticed that some of the things changed. Do you want to add additional TBHs or remove extra TBHs? So we're trying not to just move things around after you've already made changes, or add TBHs because we think you need to, because you're going to be in there adjusting and moving things around. And we want that to be a deliberate action for you to say, okay, yes, I want to bring in additional TBH or a TBR. Some other things. Now, if we go to that 3 vertical dots menu there, there's some other stuff. So in Teams, if you have managers assigned, you can see them, you can show your managers. You can move those TBHs to each of your territories. So we have all the new hires on the left. They're already there, but we can put them into AMER, EMEA, APAC, etc., to kind of get a better sense of what the person model looks like.
And
Now,
that's going to be based on the information that it's pulled in for where those needs are, the gaps are.
correct.
Yeah.
The next phase of this was the distribution. And this was something we released kind of late into the planning cycle. There hasn't been a ton of feedback on this, but the reality of what we're going for is I want to take all those TBHs and I want Fullcast to distribute them for me, either based on some sort of metric or some sort of just equal, whatever that might be. This is very person-based, so we would look at it through that lens rather than maybe your territory lens today. And we can distribute those TBHs out to the different teams for you based on this modeling aspect.
I'm going to just
Now
cut
he's
you off.
doing the TBRs, and then the TBHs are next. Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
Yes, I'm just looking at time, and we've got one more question. I want to make sure we give this some attention really quickly before we run out of time. So it says, can we build plans for CSMs that have different rules and quotas separate from sales rep plans?
I'll let Marisa answer this. Or Brian.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can build out. Yeah, the answer is yes. Yes, you can build out different models for different groups. In fact, actually, when you're going in and you're looking at effective headcount, you can select the role that you're looking at. And when you're looking at the quota and some of those other details, you're able to like kind of select, you know, the targets and the group that you're pulling those targets from, and applying that information to. And I don't know, Brian, if you want to expand on this, because I see you kind of tooling around in here as well. So.
Yeah, it's spot on. I mean, essentially, the way that we design these models is that, you know, we're determining how many people you need based on what your quotas are. So you remember we built out our earlier model for carried quota, where we specify this is about the average monthly quota for a fully ramped rep. And from this, we were able to say, based on this number and based on your goal, then this is how many reps you would need in seats to make that happen. Essentially, if you're doing this for CSMs, you would think about this in the same way. You would take their quota, you know, however their quota is measured, if that's based on renewals. You would input their average monthly quota based on those renewal numbers, and you would also similarly get outputs that tell you how many CSMs you would need for each of your regions.
All right. Last minute questions from anybody, or strong parting thoughts from any of our panelists here?
I don't want to end it on a low note, but I do want to tell everybody here something that we don't do today in this, because I think it's important to just set expectations. Today, and it's not that we're never going to do this, because I think this is how we're thinking about this in the future. Today, the territory, so your account level information, does not exist in this view. So thinking about it from the standpoint of this is the territory potential of enterprise. How many reps could I actually support in enterprise based on that potential? Those two worlds do not intersect today in the capacity planning module. From the product side of the house, that is something we recognize that, you know, we want to do and we need to do long term, and that is just something that we are continuing to explore and discuss. So just know that when we get into the capacity planning side of the house, don't expect to have all your territories and territory data there. It's really a linkage of teams, quota, and then what you build out here in this capacity planning scenario modeling.
I'm glad you mentioned that. A couple of responses from our initial poll were kind of around that territory potential data concept. So great call out.
It's not lost on me. I'm
Right.
like, this is like the core of what we want to get to. So it is important to us though.
Pending back where we started from like bringing it back to the beginning, this is the perfect time of year to start playing with this, like to get familiar with it, to tinker around with the models, start to play with them. You're never, you know, if you've got capacity planning in Fullcast already and you're not leveraging it, it's a good time to play with it, and you're not going to hurt anything by building some models out and trying out some scenarios. And to do it before you enter the planning process later on, it's just perfect timing to kind of play with it now.
Thank you for that. Yeah, if there are any parting thoughts from our attendees, feel free to send us an email or in the Q&A if you want to put a thought of like, I would love your next session to be hands-on, or I would love to dive more into XYZ. Feel free to drop us a parting thought as well. And I realize we're a couple minutes over time. We'll stick out here for a couple of minutes, but thank you to everyone who was able to join. Like I said at the beginning, we will get this Zoom recording out to everybody tomorrow, and we will look to continue our office hours on these sorts of topics. And thank you to Marisa, Tyler, and Brian.
Thanks, Sasha.
I'll linger for a moment in case any questions come through. But everyone's
jumping off.
All right,
So
great.
I think you don't have to worry.
Thanks, guys. I will follow up later. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.